with another Cosmic Salon, and in the studio today with me, I have someone I'm very, very excited to get into orbit with, and his name is Nathaniel Gillis. He's doing all the research. He has all the papers. He's a deep diver. He's a true researcher. He's a true scholar. And truly, I believe, a gentleman. I mean this in the best of terms. This work is important, and there aren't a lot of people, I'm going to make this statement, that I feel are on the level that Nathaniel is with the amount of work he's doing and the scope of it. So we have to consider the scope of it. And another thing, and why I say a gentleman here, is because there is a quality, and this can go for a woman as well, a gentlewoman, but we're dealing with a man, so at least is his corporeal body. And so is to be able to hold conversations at deep levels, scholarly, layman, etc., with people of differing opinions, with people of many faiths and backgrounds, and maintain a skill and love for the found evidence, and also as new things come in, changing and moving along the current of how that changes everything. New evidence obviously changes everything else through retrocausality, really, if nothing else. And so this is why I say this is a gentleman, and that's the basis of that. Without further ado, I'm going to let Nathaniel come on here in a second. I just want to say that I am very, very honored to have you here, Nathaniel. This work is more important now than it ever has. I believe more people are starting to turn their gaze in this direction when there is so much poppycock out there. There is so much misdirection and lots of false claims with nothing to back it. And this is a sad thing because there's so much juicy stuff to follow. There are so many trails that are rich, and there's histories and papers and testaments and all this. To have people out there that are so boldly muddying this water ties into this greater thing we're going to talk about. So welcome to the Cosmic Salon, Nathaniel.
Thank you for having me on. It's a great honor to be with you, and I'm excited to not just meet a new friend, a new person in the field, but to discuss this research with someone of depth that you have. And so thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, this is going to be good. So just to get people familiar that may not know who you are, and I don't know your full bio, actually. I'm always just so enthralled. It doesn't even, your actual bio to me does not even matter. But I do know some people like to know these things. So who are you, Nathaniel?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Well, obviously I'm Nathaniel Gillis, right? That goes without saying. But I am an independent researcher, and I am primarily known as a demonologist, just because that was the earliest research I was doing in my career. However, at this point in time, I'm evolving in I guess, my hypothesis, and I'm primarily known as a demonologist, but my research now is centered around what's called necronetics, which is the self-replication of species. And I'm trying to understand hybridism throughout history, and especially within the context of the phenomenon as we know it today. But I'm a lecturer, I'm a writer, an author, and that's really who I am and what I'm all about.
Yes, thank you. And see, this again goes into you were primarily known as a demonologist and how that's blossomed into that's just an aspect. That's a facet.
Mhm.
Let's dive right in. What exactly is necronetics? And is this, I think I've heard you, but I may be wrong because I have been listening to a lot of you. Are you
Mhm.
working on a book called that?
I'm working on a series called Necronetics, the first installation of which will be called The Skin That Crawls. And I'm dealing with the subject of the incubus throughout history and kind of really carving out a niche field. Like when I first got into that research, all of it consisted of women being visited by male entities. And demonology, I mean, demonology didn't know what to say about that. That's when I realized like I had stumbled upon something else entirely. And so that's when I had to embrace the data and abandon the dogma that I inherited in my youth. Like one of my key components here within necronetics is that whatever we're dealing with is an occultist. It's not a demon. It's not horns and hooves. And that number two, this whatever they are, they do have bodies. And I'm specifically talking within the context of necronetics. But whatever we're dealing with that is within hybridism has a body. It is secreting substances on experiencers. So that's when I realized, like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem spiritual at all, right? There's something much deeper going on here. And so that's when I got into incubi literature, which led me into possession phenomena. And then at the very end of necronetics, I nestled in the 16th century in the Debuk legend, which also consisted of the self-replication of a species. That's when I came to the conclusion that, like, okay, yeah, the incubus is the Debuk. And whatever we're dealing with, it transcends all models, and there's a reason for that. And so necronetics essentially is the self-replication of a species, and it's a new species, according to my research.
This is very exciting for me to hear personally. And
Mhm,
I do not hear a lot of people out here in the field with us
mhm,
use the term species like I do and you do. And this is it. It can be rabble rousing for others, but I can see it clearly. It's actually visible to me.
mhm,
And I know that may sound outlandish, but there's a lot that one just cannot back up. So I'm speaking personally, but
mhm.
I want to get into this idea of different species and how the human form is almost ubiquitous. But before we get there,
Mhm.
let's get an understanding of what is a demon.
So there were two common theories throughout history. Number one, a demon essentially was a fallen angel or the offspring of a fallen angel. And this is when you get into the Nephilim and Rephaim research. So the theory goes that yes, there were so the sons of God saw the daughters of men, went in unto them, made unto them wives, and they bore children. And so a lot of the earliest demonology said that demons were the disembodied ghosts of these progeny, like these hybrids that were caused by Nephilim, that once these hybrids died, that their spirits became demons. And that's one theory. The second theory, the one I'm leaning more towards, is that these were some kind of disembodied consciousness, not just the byproduct of Nephilim, but literally people who have left their own bodies and for whatever reason they mutated into some, again, demonic entity. Now that's again, I didn't come to that organically, right? It wasn't like I grew up in church and somebody convinced me of that. It wasn't until I got back into the writings of antiquity, into what the Repiumai were, long before the Hebrew scholars reincorporated it into their mythology. And so in biblical antiquity, we have Rephaim, and that's what they're called. They're called ghosts and phantoms. And the problem, though, I've always had with that terminology is that it's a borrowed loan word. That came from the Repiumai, which was discovered through archaeology, written in Ugaritic ritual bowls. And so when you get back to the earliest definition, again, that the Repiumai, that came to Rephaim, they're ghosts, some form of mutated consciousness. And so that's, and kind of extrapolate that into some of the old texts in the Old Testament where the rite of exorcism itself was not designed for horns and hooves. It was centered around a tradition. It's called the open vessel law. And that was when, like, let's say a priest or a man of God would go into a house. If there was a corpse in the house, they themselves would become defiled by it. They would become unclean, as would the vessels that preserved all of their food, right? Because they kept all of their preserved stuff in clay pottery. And so the idea was that the ghost and spirit of that corpse would inhabit and defile all of the open vessels that kept the food. And that was called the open vessel law. And so later on in history, which is it's weird to say that, but later on in history, we became the vessels that could be defiled by unclean consciousness. And so that orchestrated what's called the exorcistic rite, which is that's when we get into Catholicism, and it's a whole nother show. My point is, those are the two trains of thought regarding the demonic, and it does appear to be that what some of at least what we're dealing with are not horns and hooves. It's a form of consciousness through and through.
This is fascinating. And one of the things in my, I guess, tenure here in the realm
Yeah.
has been, I've had a lot of experiential stuff, and I've started to understand from a very, very young age, very, very young. And I wasn't raised religious, so I had to come to terms and ideas and value on my own without having been a scholar as well. So I had to just kind of work things out. And then, you know, of course, I got older and I started digging around. I start hearing these things, and you know how this goes. So I started to feel like I was cataloging something that felt familiar in different people or in the field. And it wasn't a massive catalog, but I would see repetition in certain signatures. And what I mean by that is the way I would feel, the way the air would ionize, the change in circumstances, or the weirding, the synchro weirding, and all this, and then kind of find myself in an uncanny moment, or in a counter space kind of moment where I would be in a space with something. Now, the something could be housed in what we call a human, right? In a body. But sometimes it wouldn't be. And my point being, and where I want to go with this, is that I started to recognize these signatures, and through repetition, I now recognize many, and not as many as, say, like the Goetia 72 and all these other tales and this millions and all this, but a small group, like almost a small network. And ultimately, it came back down to something where you've been talking about recently, which really gets me excited to get into this, is that these, from what I'm seeing, now there are separate things, but I'm honing in on one thing in particular, are people. They're occultists.
Yes.
And you are out there really bringing this to the light for people, using sigils. And one of the things I had recognized just through reading books, I love books. I have a really wonderful library. It's respectable. You know, it's not massive, but it's not small. And I started, you know, the Game of Saturn, really with the Solabusca Tarot, and other things through bloodlines, how they would hop through. And this was very intentional. Baptism of death, baptism of resurrection through death, through lineage, through genealogy, that this is an intentional thing, and that these are occultists doing these acts. Let's get into that.
Yes, and that was again one of the most troubling aspects of my newest research is coming to that conclusion and really holding myself intellectually accountable, right? I had to make a decision. What am I going to commit to? I mean, it wasn't a hard decision, obviously, but I had to really abandon a lot of what I was taught and, even my preconceptions, my biases. And I just sat down and I said, I'm human, I'm a researcher, but I'm human. Look at what we're finding with the data. Like, look at the data sample, and absolutely, whatever we're dealing with they do appear to be occultists. And I'm talking about initiates from the highest order, not just the guy that bags the groceries that says, hey, I dabble in it. No, whatever we're dealing with,
Yes.
again, it's transcendent. And some of it is earthly, some of the other sigils I'm finding, uh the way it's not even the symbol itself, it's the way that they're positioned on the body and how they're getting there. One of the earliest cases that really frightened me was the remote viewer whose family I worked with, and he was going out of his body and meeting entities that claimed to be his guides. And it's a really interesting story how the son actually got a hold of me because he watched a lecture of mine where I was talking about skin anomalies in demonology, and he's like, he emails me. He's like, Nathaniel, because I don't know if my story will help your research, but maybe we could talk sometime. And absolutely, it helped my research. It confirmed a lot of the suspicions I had. And at the same time, though, and you've probably been here yourself, my friend, where it's disturbing, and you're like, I know this is happening, but I don't want it to be happening. I would rather the question and the answer both be simple, right? To where it would just be at the end of the day, we at least can comprehend and quantify what we're dealing with. But as it was, I'm on the phone with this gentleman, and he's telling me his story about his father, who was a famous remote viewer. And his father would meet with his guides out of body. He would describe a golden, again, this is Kabbalistic, a golden tether that would connect his I guess his consciousness, astral body to his earthly body. And he said that one day, this is his son talking. He said, I was playing video games. He said, my dad, I knew he was in the middle of a session. He said, but for some reason the session ended early. Now my father is stumbling down the stairs. He's white as a ghost. He cannot talk, and he's weeping. And he said, Nathaniel, my father's a veteran. He's the toughest man I've ever known. He's like, we've had family members die, and he never cried a tear. He was just a very hard, very tough individual. He said, but at this point, my father was inconsolable, and we did not know what to do. And it's at that point, he said that my father grabbed his chest and he hit the ground. He said, we called the EMS. As they're taking his shirt off, they're cutting his shirt. He says, as they're pulling his shirt off from underneath the skin, moving towards the surface, were sigils. They were interreligious and cross-cultural. And he said, we didn't know what they were. He said, we have photographic and video evidence of this. And I have that. So 2 points I want to make. Number one, whatever we're dealing with, again, this gets into the Collins elite research, is outside of space-time. And there's enough evidence now to suggest that they were not sigilizing his body, they were sigilizing something else, and it was moving through his body through the three stages of sigilization, which, by the way, people, Nathaniel, you made that up. I wish I did, right? That's an Austin Osman Spar quote of, that's his term, sigilization. But it was the body itself was demonstrating the three stages of sigilization. And so when I got that case study, I sat down with it for about a month or so. And I started to digest the implications. And the implications are the following. Number one, that whatever we're dealing with, again, is outside of the construct. Number two, it's a high initiate, it's an adept, and it is performing rituals. And we, on this other side of it, we're only seeing half of the story. And so that's what really kind of propagated and fertilized my theory. But at the same time, my new friend, I don't want any of this to be true because whatever that is, we in the field, and I'm just going to speak for myself, I'm not going to speak for everybody, I in the field, I have no way to quantify that other than something is outside of this, whatever this construct is, and it performed a ritual upon that remote viewer. In fact, if I can go a step further, when he was interfacing with these entities, he said that they flanked him on the left and right sides. And I asked, this is fascinating. I have his notes too. I asked the son, I said, did he ever describe like what the environment looked like? He said, yes, it was the classic UFO. Huh, it's the UFO abduction. I said, no way. He goes, absolutely. He said he was in a metallic room. He said it was absent of any technology. There was a metallic table, and then the entities were flanking him on the left and right sides. So I said, okay, can you go in depth as to what actually happened prior to these sigils appearing underneath your father's skin? He said, well, according to my father, he said, what happened is we got him awake. They revived him. We're at the hospital. When they finally got him, forgive the term, but like juiced up, on happy pills and stuff. They got him feeling good and everything. He's finally talking and he's finally willing to talk about it. And so they said, okay, like what actually happened? And he said, well, he goes, I went into my session. Everything was fine. He said, and I was interfacing. I was talking to what looked like my guides. They looked to be my guides. And the someone's like, well, how do you know that? He goes, because, he goes, I thought I was where I was supposed to be, and I was who I was supposed to be with. They appeared to be in image my guides. And he said that he had a password with his guides. This is interesting to me. So he said, this is one of the very first cases I've had of this. And I was like, oh my goodness, what in the world's going on? He said I had a password with him. And in times past, I would give them the password. They would give me the password. And I would know again that I'm where I should be and I am who I am should be with. And he said it was at that point where he realized like these entities had no idea what the password was. And he realized that. And when he realized that, they realized that. And it was at that point, like everything just fell apart. All hell broke loose. Next thing he knows, they shape shifted into something inhuman. And he's slammed back into his body. And now he's feeling a burning sensation on his chest. So that was the beginning and ending of it, at least that case study. But what this does for researchers like myself, it's uncomfortable because, again, this is something different than horns and hooves. To me, according to Nathaniel Gillis, this appears to be a new species. And I absolutely believe, and I put this on my Instagram today, that this is what the Collins elite discovered. People like to paint them as if they're religious zealots. That's not true. Here's how I know that. Because their conclusions were antithetical to any Christian dogma. The afterlife, which to them is where these entities exist, was just for formerly human beings. If you were an evil person, you're damned to hell, right? If you're an angel, you're in heaven. What they discovered was something completely different. They had to start from scratch. And at the very end of their conclusions, at least in 1952 to 1970, they said, okay, there's really no way to quantify these entities other than the fact that they're practicing the occult. So that's where I come from when I suggest in my feeble human nature that whatever we're dealing with seems to be more like a disembodied occultist who is performing rituals on abductees from the other side.
It's profound, and I am in here saying I think that this is also looking like the case to me as well.
It's terrifying, and I don't say that lightly, and I'm not trying to be hyperbolic,
It
but all of the evidence suggests that, my friend, all of it.
this is the thing I find, and this is why I'm so grateful for people like you that are doing, looking for hard material receipts, because I mostly come from an intuitive background. Of course,
Hmm.
I'm book read and I read. I'm all over, but my abilities have always been very intuitive, and I've been deeply, let's use the kind word, used for those as a child. So this species, let's talk about them as occultists in the material realm. So let's go back to origins. And I know we're speculating, but you may have some receipts here or some evidence or something that might lead us in a direction that is very worth looking into. So if we go through origins of these now non-local, I guess, but local in here, and this becomes very shaky ground to talk about anyway, non-locality. However, what are the origins as far as interacting in this realm that we call the material world? That, and let's just get some basis for it. There's a lot of stuff here that, there's the Abrahamic religions, there's the pre-Abrahamic stuff. There's a lot of spirituality amongst what we have colloquially considered other humans. And that seems to be almost baked into the reality here as a spiritual experience. And I myself have this, I have this inclination within me as well. I think we may all, I'm not sure. Well, I know lots of atheists that say they don't, but that is still actually posturing towards something that is outside of them. When they even say it's nothing, there's still a spiritual, albeit non-spiritual connotation because of duality. So what do you think the origins are? Were they outside of this realm, this construct to begin with? Were they in here? And what are we looking at? Let's speculate, and perhaps you have some receipts or some stories, anecdotes, something to give us.
So I could give you the mythology, or I can give you the data that I have been collecting. Let's go with the data. I am interpreting their pathology and origin by virtue of the alphabet iconography I'm finding on experiencers. I think that's a beneficial way to interpret not just their intentions, but their belief system. It's a
Yes.
lot like, okay, right, if I were to write an English letter on somebody's skin, somebody's going to say, okay, Nathaniel knows English. Or, you know what I mean? At least the belief system and the level of literacy present. The Theban alphabet that I have found on experiencers implicates at least someone who was a student of Cornelius Agrippa, the influential occultist. He wrote 3 books of occult philosophy in the 16th century. And he also created sigils. He would carve them in a talisman and intentionally project consciousness and intention into them. That was one of his, I guess, philosophies and traditions. And so that's when, again, here's the problem. Like a lot of these individuals don't even know they have them. And that terrifies me. Like I'm good friends with parapsychologists, specifically one, a very dear friend of mine and a mentor, who he's had cases like this where the individual has been abducted and actively claims. Now, here's a key point. And I don't want to ramble because I have ADHD and I kind of go everywhere and stuff. So just if I get too lofty, just bring my feet down to earth and we'll go down another rabbit hole.
I
But
admire this
he's
about you, though.
thank you, thank you. It's insane, honestly. But he said, Nathaniel, he said that these experiencers would explicitly testify that they were abducted by aliens. And here's the problem: the phenomenon had programmed them to believe it. And then they would take an ultraviolet light and place it over their arms, and they would have Theban iconography on their skin. What? Again, that should not be taking place. And so, again, what I'm trying to do into interpreting the data, and at least presenting a methodology, is saying, okay, if these are Theban alphabet, if these are Theban iconography, if that's what's being carved into the flesh of experiencers, then whoever's doing this has a knowledge, right, of Theban iconography. They are Theban practitioners. And so I go back through the lineage of that practice, and then I start getting into, again, Cornelius Agrippa. And the problem, though, is that, and this is very interesting to me, at least fascinating, I shouldn't say very interesting, but what I'm finding is that a lot of the occult practices employed by these entities came from earthly occultists. What? Like,
Mm-hmm.
again, we're talking about people that should, right? That's another one of those things where it's like, oh my God, I hold my head at times and I'm thinking this should not be here if our model is correct. And so again, yeah, so these philosophies and traditions were born and bred via earthly occultists. It was their theology, it was their philosophy, it was their traditions that evolved throughout history, and and that's what these entities are incorporating into their rituals. And so this gets back into memory. How did they get access to this kind of stuff? And why is it evolving? Right? So my point is, if we look at the manifestation and evolution of iconography on abductees, you can see it as it evolves according to earthly occultists. Like, I'll go back in time. Let's go to the 14th, 13th centuries, in which era literature we also had symbols carved into flesh. This is in demonology. And the symbols, some of them, they were called the devil's mark, the witch's mark, and they had a lot of, again, dogmatism and religious persecution behind it, which I despise. But my point being that there was a supernatural sigilization that occurred on these experiencers as well. Like the flesh upon which these symbols were carved, it died. It went into necrosis, where the sigil itself kind of physiologically affected the skin it was carved into. So my point is, yes, some of this does follow, right, earthly occultists, but at the same time, there's something deeply supernatural to all of this, because an occultist, when they carve, again, they write, they carve, they would not have the ability to change the physiology of the skin at all, unless, here we go, my friend, unless it's by virtue of ritual magic. It is the byproduct, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
not this. Now we're getting deep. Now it is the byproduct. Not that it's right. It's not just something that happened. It is the secondary consequence of a successfully fulfilled ritual. And that is where the research is right now. But I'm struggling. I mean, as much as I know the evolution of their pathology, right? I still struggle with a way to quantify them. And I've had that issue for the longest time, and I got to a point where I'm like, I'm just going to structure necronetics and let the cards fall where they may, because this research has to be done. And I'm glad that there are people like yourself and others that are starting to look at this rationally, right? Not that you've been irrational. I'm not saying that at all, but are actively looking at this, right? And saying, oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening. And yet it is. And there's a lot there. But what fascinates me as well is the lengths the phenomenon will go to hide these experiences from experiencers.
Yes.
They are sigilized. Again, that's not a Nathaniel Gillis term. I wish I could have came up with that, but that's a term authored by Alston Osman Spar. But these individuals are actively under the impression that they're being taken by extraterrestrials. Now, I'm just going to kind of get on my stepping stool here, soapbox. Um, Extraterrestrials would not want an altar. Again, it appears, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it appears again that we're dealing with something more local and something that's more akin to an earthly occultist that's transcended the uh, the construct.
Yes. Yes, I'm
Oh
so with
God.
you in this. It to me it seems really clear, but I realize that people have to get there to see it.
Yeah.
Okay, just to backtrack a little because we have a wide audience here, and so
Hmm.
because we do a lot of different topics.
Hmm.
So I like to bring some people in. I can hear the questions. Theban,
Hmm.
bring people into the significance. What is this? When you say that, what are you saying,
Hmm.
and how does that play into all this?
So Theban alphabet was also known as the witch's alphabet, and it's a cipher system based on the Latin alphabet. And again, this gets back to it was actually published by I'm going to murder this last name. I know. I always have a bad time. Trithemius the book is Polygraphia. It was in the 16th century, and it was in honor of Thebes, the honoris of Thebes. And then it was carried into the work of Cornelius Agrippa when he wrote his three books of occult philosophy. But these were designed again as symbols to be used and possibly weaponized against others. Not just that, but they were first carved into not just as amulets, they were carved into candles, stones. They were used for spells and rituals. Now, knowing that, why are we finding them under ultraviolet light? Does it make any sense? But these were sigils, symbols that were used by occultists in order to not just communicate, but to design intent and to affect, influence reality. And so a lot of this goes back to Egyptology, of course, Thebes, but it was a language system designed to facilitate magical rituals.
So let's play here.
Hmm.
When we're talking about all of this, and something pinged for me in what you were saying prior to getting everyone on board with Theban
Hmm.
necrosis. I'm following a thread right now. I haven't done anything because I had an equipment breakdown, and so I was kind
Hmm.
of ironically shut off from the outer world and the phone, everything. And so I had a lot of time to recently follow a couple trails. And one
Hmm.
of the trails I'm on that I was on, but I think I did need to be distant from the digital realm, and we can talk about that later. So we understand that the original parchment and scrolls, a lot of times these, parchments are flesh,
Hmm.
oftentimes in the ancient world. And I digress here for a minute. I just want to say this so that people don't yell at me. I didn't mean to just acknowledge the Abrahamic religion, Hindu, Buddhist, Shinto, all that, and prior. I just want to shout out because I'll hear about it. So, flesh, parchment, scrolls, sigils. Flesh has long been, leather, basically, leather, right?
Hmm.
Has long been one of those mediums that is used to communicate language or uh, invoke, evoke, move energy. And as you
Hmm.
know, it's this whole idea of intention, energy, and matter, how this all comes together to create something. And
Hmm.
this, we can find it in the Bible. We can find it everywhere. This is old school. Just like you're talking about Austin, I say his last name Spare, but Austin Osman, Spar, Spare, whatever.
Hmm.
He's instrumental. And it's ironic that in more modern days here, he's come from the shadows because he's mostly really the one of the shadow band people of his time through
Oh yeah.
non-digital, but he was really hidden. So necrosis, I'm looking at and I'm following a lot of Black Death plague stuff currently,
Hmm.
and I couldn't help but find myself into the realm of, and there's three different kinds of plague, but and I'm also tying in mummies with this. So this
Hmm.
idea is very present with me right now, Nathaniel. And as you were talking about the sigil moving through that, coming forward on that man's belly,
Hmm.
and then what you were talking about earlier, this is the medium that is old school OG with old world occultists.
Absolutely.
It is organic. It is a living, if not now, was, and it offers more potential for a greater outcome, more bang for the buck. So I'm going to throw all that on your plate. What are you
Hmm.
seeing here in connection?
Uh, I'm going to respond in kind. There's research being done where, at least in history, that again, what I mean by that is I'm looking at case studies now that are from history.